You clicked on this video because you wanted to see change happen. What you probably have been frustrated by is if you're anything like me, you watch a lot of content online. Mostly when it comes to the political stuff, you'll notice that a lot of it tells you that there's a lot of problems in the world and nothing ever tells you how to actually fix it or the solutions. I see a lot of videos online nowadays and I share the same frustrations as you, and my goal with this video is to help you get out of this nihilism and make you realize that there is still hope left in this world. And so what I did is I took some time to do some research and see how we as humans collectively in America as well have overcome this sense of hopelessness in the past and how we can actually change politics today and achieve real change. The story I wanted to go over today is focusing on a group called the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Now, I wanted to set the stage for this story because I really want to emphasize that this is a time in our lives where if you're anything like me, you feel hopeless, right? You can't afford anything nowadays. Having a house is so far out of reach, but even affording your daily basic necessities is so out of reach as well. Working your average job nowadays, which equates to around $40,000 per year, is literally not enough to support yourself getting an apartment nowadays in 2025. If that is frustrating to you, which I think you already feel it in your day-to-day, then I want to let you know that you have to start with the change, and the change starts with having hope. Hope, however, is not something that you just have, it's something that you build. And that's something that I wanted to highlight because the NAACP knew that. So let's focus this on one specific person and see how the story evolves. The story first starts with Mary White Ovington. She was a wealthy white woman who was very far removed from the conflict back in the early 1900s, where racism was still rampant. During this time period, of course, after the American Civil War, the slaves were finally freed and emancipated in both the North and the South. But the thing is that Black people were still not going to be treated any differently. This is a period of time where we as a society, and as someone who was born way after the Civil Rights Act, where I've only ever known a world where we respect every person of different colors in the same exact way, but just go back into this era in time, Black people were still being oppressed, and you still didn't feel like you were worthy enough to be in this society because you were told to drink at a certain water fountain. This is the world we lived in, and it was terrible. I think things are pretty bad now, but I have to take a step back and realize that things were so much worse back then that it was okay and it was normal to spit on people, to lynch Black people for having a different opinion than you. It was absurd just how bad things were back then. So as I get that point across going forward, I hope you realize that we still as humanity and as Americans overcame this conflict. And this is how I'm going to show you how it was done. Mary White Ovington, again, to focus on her, is a wealthy white woman. She is far removed from this conflict. There was this one particular instance that frustrated Mary White Ovington, and it was back in 1908 in Springfield, Illinois, where a white mob was outraged that a Black man had supposedly sexually assaulted a white woman. And what this white mob ended up doing is burning down tons of Black businesses and homes and killed many people in the process. Of course, at the end of this process, we later found out that the Black man was falsely accused of sexually assaulting the white woman, but nonetheless, the damage was already done, and there was articles everywhere that spread like wildfire about just how bad this was as a result of false news. And one particular instance was a person named William English Walling who decided to publish an article about this injustice. Mary, reading this, found at the end of the article a very interesting and inspiring question: what is to be done? And that lit something underneath her that previously was not there before. So to draw the parallel between today, if the society and the system we have feels broken and apathetic and nothing feels like it can change, what can we do about it? Mary, being so frustrated about this change, had this catalyst. And what we all have is something that has happened in recent memories that make us believe that things need to change. Maybe we haven't experienced it yet. Maybe so many things would be the catalyst, but so many bad things happen every day. How could we just even care anymore? But for all of us, we need to have that one particular thing that makes us get up out of our seats and actually do something about it. And so how do we focus that direction? What Mary did was that she essentially wrote a letter to the article writer himself, to William, and together they actually decided to write out a document called The Call. The Call is basically a formal issue that was written to many prolific activists at the time, but it was also written in news articles and newspapers everywhere. And the thing is that news spread so slowly back then. And we take for granted as well that we see and get information so fast from so many different kinds of people. So again, it's a miracle when anything can get done back then, but that's exactly what happened. And eventually around 300 people came together in a convention center and later started what is called the NAACP. Again, just to remind you, is is one of the most instrumental organizations that went on to help activists like Martin Luther King Jr. actually achieve the real change in the Civil Rights Act, which, for the record, not only granted equal freedoms to black people, but of all races, religions, and genders. That is what they set out to do, and they achieved that. So the next thing is, how do they do that? You form an organization, but the next step is, how do we actually do something with that power? The people are together, but what do we do then? And that's something that I ask myself a lot too, because a lot of videos online nowadays focus on telling you to organize, to go knock on doors, do whatever it takes to change the game. And what frustrates me is that I feel like I can't contribute to something if I don't know what my actions will do to get to that point. So to set the stage first, the NAACP still stumbled around a lot when it had first started. And with any organization, when you put, let's say, 300 people together in a room and tell them how to fix racism. During this time period, especially around the early 1920s, for example, there were many attempts to create a bill that blocked lynching. In fact, I wrote down two of them: the Dyer Bill in 1922 and the Costigan-Wagner Bill in 1935. But those bills were attempted to ban and make lynching illegal. Now, in a sense, it was kind of already illegal to kill people and hang people, but there was never really any severe punishment for it. It went on and people just looked the other way. Police officers just thought, oh, a lynching happened, and then move on. But we never actually took it seriously. And the problem that frustrates me, and I'm going to introduce this to you guys, is when do you think lynching was finally made illegal in all of America for good? The answer is that it was in 2022. Now, lynching was already illegal in individual states, and eventually every state came to that same conclusion. But I want you to have this idea settled in your head for a moment, that within our government, we thought that after 9/11, after COVID-19, after the assassination of MLK, after Kennedy, that we then thought lynching was considered a hate crime, and that hate crime should therefore be illegal. Is crazy. It should scare you to think that politics moves slowly. And that's the point that I want to move into next, because we don't want politics to move slowly like this going forward. And with how scary it was now, then imagine how bad it was back then, when again, racism was so systemic and rooted into people's minds. In so many people's heads, it was just normal to think lesser of your fellow human being. Now that I've got that out of the way, let's focus on what they did do to be successful. They had a very deliberate strategy on how to fix things. It was a two-part strategy. One of them was called legalism. And what legalism was essentially setting the legal precedent of whatever law it is that you're trying to establish so that it can eventually be federal. So the first thing that they tackled, which was a famous lawyer at the time, Thurgood Marshall, you may have heard of him in a textbook, and that's because what he decided to do was tackle very specific and deliberate cases. In one example of a case in Sweat versus Painter, graduate students didn't have the same access to the same facilities and schools of colored people and non-colored people. So there was this despairing equality, and so when it comes to academics and merit, it was very easy to win that legal battle. And eventually everything kept on going and going until we could overturn one simple idea, which was separate but equal, which was a doctrine in the Plessy versus Ferguson Act, which again, you may have heard in a history textbook, that basically said that for as long as this person has a water fountain here and this person has a separate but different water fountain here, it's okay. And that was Thurgood Marshall's plan. And as you probably know next, Brown versus Board education basically made it so that segregation in schools, and therefore segregation as a whole, was finally outlawed. So there we go. Legalism. Set the legal precedent, and now everything's good, right? Now, the reason why I mentioned it was a two-part strategy is because, again, now that segregation is outlawed in the courts, the thing is that no one's actually going to go out there and enforce it. So it really took lobbying, which sounds like a bad word, and when I think of lobbying, you think of probably buying out a politician to do whatever you want, and in some regards, it is kind of that, but let me explain. Lobbying is a few components that I decided to write down for you that are very important when it comes to achieving any political change. The first part is that you inform your policymakers. As an organization, there is a subsection of people like journalists or researchers that go out there into the wild, and they document and research racial injustices, how often lynchings are happening, how much harder it is for a black person to get a job than a white person to get a job. They gather all the data and then they let these politicians know. Another part is making legislation. Sometimes we as a people get together and make the policies ourselves when there are actual people in Congress that are supposed to do that themselves. Is it kind of messed up that we have to take it in our own hands to create the rules of our government? Yes, but that is what we still have to do to achieve change. Another part is that they built coalitions. For example, we have an organization in Nevada that wants to end racial injustice. In a separate state such as Florida, for example, there is another separate organization that wanted to do the same thing as well. They came up independently, but what the NAACP sought to do is to unite all these groups together and unite all our voices as one. By doing this, eventually the Leadership Conference of Civil Rights led to the unification of over 100 of these groups. One last thing I'll get into about lobbying as well is that it's also involving grassroots organization. And grassroots just basically means actually talking to the people, which for for the record, is the most important part in making any political change happen. Because for as long as there's a bunch of rich people lobbying and doing the same thing and spending a tons of money to make politicians do whatever they want, we as the people have to remind our politicians that we're the ones voting for them. And if that we all show our strength and our solidarity and unite together and show that we're not going to vote for you in next election if you're going to do this decision, the politicians are going to think otherwise about listening to the interests of the billionaire donor. And you can kind of see where I'm starting to go when it comes to the issues of today. But when it comes to the issues of back then, when it came to the Civil Rights Act, it still was blocked a lot of the time too. And the thing about politics is that in general, and I'll use the Senate as the example, you need at least the majority votes to pass a bill. But more often than not, what is called a filibuster is basically a concept that the Senate, to make sure that if you don't have a bill that gets to 60 votes, we're just going to block it. And we're not supposed to abuse it in the way that we do. But nowadays, because of how polarized our politics is today, it's easy for just one political party to just not let anything go through while the other political party scrambles and tries to get just enough people from the other side to vote in a bill. It's very hard. And that's the thing back then too. Southern Democrats, when they blocked anti-lynching bills and different versions of the Civil Rights Act, they wanted to make sure that segregation and civil rights as a whole was a state issue, not a federal one. If this is the kind of rhetoric that you hear a lot in modern day politics, then yeah, it's a pretty bad thing that we still think that it's a state's issue for something that we deem is a fundamental human right. And that's the thing that I wanted to get into my next point, which is political inequality. As we take it back to modern days and we realize that, okay, what we need to do is to all come together as an organization and do something, is that we still don't have the same power as we once did back then, because so much money has concentrated into the top 1%. And even of that 1%, it's a 0.01%. Just a few thousand people across hundreds of millions of people have so much money that they can control everything that happens in our politics. And I really wanted to get it through to your head that until we rectify that issue, nothing else will happen. Because we can try to pass a bill that taxes the rich, but what are the people going to do? They're going to block the bill. But we need to realize that we are voting in someone who actually has our interests. So to tie it all back together into how the NAACP inspires us to do something today, it's that we all need to come together and organize and show that through our collective voice that we can achieve one single thing together. Because this wouldn't have happened nowadays because it's so easy for people to get distracted. Just as we're starting to get class consciousness, for example, someone will start some rhetoric about immigration or trans rights or abortions, and it completely halts all the progress we're making so that we can go somewhere else and argue about this thing that is important, but ultimately it's a social issue that was meant to divide us. And we're never, ever, as a society, are going to agree on a lot of these things, even if we may feel justified in thinking that this is the objective right thing to do. That's just not how society has worked and will work. And what we need to do and make sure that we can pay our bills is pay attention to the fact that it's the rich and the upper class and the billionaires that are controlling everything, and that we all need to band together and do something about it. We have people. And people vote for politicians. The thing that I want to get across to you as the audience is that you have to not only just vote someone in, but you have to show that if a politician doesn't do exactly what you feel like represents your fellow people, you have to stand up for it and do something about it. And that's what I wanted to tie into with the grassroots organization portion of this segment, is that what they did when it came to grassroots organizations is that they knocked on doors because they wanted people to realize this fight is bigger than us. For example, a Mr. Beast video will have 400 million views, for example, and when you talk to someone average on the street, they probably didn't watch it. So I really want to get it through to your one head that if it's not my video or someone else's video that is going to change things, it requires your specific action to get anything done. And something that I see a lot is that people give up because they feel like their own actions can't do anything. But the thing about hope, I'll use a personal example to establish some credibility here. My workplace has been increasingly become more toxic in the sense that people are not getting the proper raises, people are being forced to undergo manipulative sales practices. And even though I've done my research in the past few months to really learn about how important it is to be a part of a union, which whether or not you believe it's a good thing, unions are the only thing that allow us to stand up against a corporation and do anything about it. Because you can't just ask your manager if your manager has a manager who then can approve your raise. So essentially you have no ability to ever fight for your right to have better rights, better working conditions, and better pay. And that's what unions exist to do. And despite all these existing ideas that I have that unions are a good thing, it was not until my fellow coworker, who was a lot more strong-willed and louder than I am, who was willing to voice her expressions, that it made me realize that I should be a part of a union finally, because someone else said it too. That I can't imagine people who are just one person away from finally feeling inspired enough to do real change. And that's the thing I really want to focus on. We have to take accountability for our own actions. It is us at the end of the day that decide what to do with our time, our lives, and our money. And we often underestimate just how important it is that we ourselves do something about it. The thing that I feel excited and hopeful about in today's society that feels very nihilistic and hopeless is that we have so much power to do one thing. I can have this power to make a YouTube video that at the very least may reach 10 people. And of those 10 people, for example, all it takes is for you to talk to one other person to eventually have them convinced, and it just spreads like a wildfire. You may think that hope is naive and optimistic and that it won't get us anywhere, but I want to offer you a different perspective. What else do we have besides hope then? We can't do anything if not hope for a better change. And I'm not a guy for quotes, but one thing that has given me inspiration and hope in the midst of all of this is a quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it basically says the following: "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. One should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless and yet be determined to make them otherwise." I like this quote because it really establishes this important thing that the logical thing is to feel hopeless because there are more things that aren't happening that should be happening. What we as a people still can do is fight to make the things that we want to happen. Because if we can all come together for one thing, and that is ultimately to get the rich to pay their fair share of taxes and contribute back into the society that they decided to exit into their private jets, then that's how we're going to do it. Now, going forward, I will start making a lot of videos covering wealth inequality and problems that cover everything that you feel in your day-to-day, because one thing that I feel like is missing nowadays is the kind of action that gives you hope and gives you solutions. You can go on to watch 10 more videos that tell you about what is wrong in this world, the drama that ensues in our politics and celebrities and all this stuff. We can continue to consume that slop, and I will too, for the record, but I want to set this record straight as well that we need to do something. So again, the 3 actionable takeaways that I want you to come out of this video and hopefully apply in your day-to-day life is 3 simple things. Number 1, it is to share the message. I can't explain enough how important that is, and I hope I've already established by this point that by talking to one person and that person talks to one person, how fast word of mouth spreads. If one person is all it takes for you to try a restaurant or to get Avengers Endgame to unprecedented box office numbers for $2 billion, then again, I can't stress enough how important it is that you talk to your fellow people about politics. Talk to them about what's important to them, what frustrates them. Talk about what's important, and you come to realize that we're all the same in one specific regard, and that is that we all want a better life, and we can't have a better life if we don't have basic human rights of health insurance, of higher wages, and prices that are actually manageable. Once you have that in common with someone and you have that natural human dialogue, that's when we all start to collectively stand together and do something about it. The second part is being a part of an organization. Being a part of the cause is super important. It takes one person across 100 people on a mission to go knock on every door to tell someone, hey, there's this important battle going on. We need you to vote. Because there's going to be over 90% of people that never do anything, never get involved in politics. And that, for example, is my parents or maybe my coworkers. These are the people that are trying to live their day-to-day lives and have kids and just do what they can. But what we need to do as the active minority of people is influence the passive majority to get up and just do one simple thing. Because that's all we really need to do to start change. And being part of protests help to show that we all stand for a cause and show that these politicians who don't represent our interests, Democrat or Republican, if they don't do something that benefits all of us, we need to let them know that they're not going to be voted in next time. And that's super important because our votes are still just as valuable as they were today than they were 60 years ago. And the last important part about fighting for a cause is simply donating into the work. And I know personally that I don't like seeing a political ad telling me to donate. And I really don't like it when these politicians haven't told me what the money is going to do, or they haven't even made me feel like that they deserve it. They just tell me that we need to fight this fight and that you need to donate $1 today, and that sucks. But donating is super powerful because it funds the people who actually run things. It has to be someone's job to start the organization, but if no one's getting paid to do that, then we have to go back into a normal job and we never can fight the fight. We need the journalists, we need the lobbyists, we need every person who is doing that active organization work to be paid in order to actually have them do the effective work needed that is to be done. So donating is something that I have a hard time doing, and so if you are interested going forward, I can make a video if there's enough support in the comments diving deep into what organizations that maybe I can start supporting and that I can start recommending to you folks as well. But just to let you know, being a part of an organization, donating and talking to your fellow people is the best and easiest way to achieve real and actionable change. And I hope that this inspires you, because in your daily media diet, there's gonna be a lot of things to make you feel hopeless. But I wanted to tie it back into this one point. Mary White Ovington knew that her actions mattered, and that was enough for her to get by. So I really want you to come out of this video, and if nothing else, Just believe in one thing, and is that what you do matters. If you believe what you do matters, there will be tons of other people who will do the same as well. With anything, with hope, with change, and with any big thing that has ever happened in history, and how we had to create incredible amounts of change to even get something as powerful as the Civil Rights Act to be passed, for example, it all started because we believed that our single lone individual action, maybe even just donating $1 a month when we can do nothing else, was enough and that it mattered. This is a figure you may have heard a lot, but when it comes to having $1 billion, you have to make $10,000 every day for 273 years to get to just $1 billion. These people have incredible amounts of money that they can toss in at any moment, but what they still cannot do is have more than one vote, which is what you have. And it's not just having one vote, it's having one action. And you don't have to do just one action of talking to someone or voting or being a part of an organization, but it's important that we ourselves can control our actions and have individual strength. What the elite have in wealth, we have in power and numbers. Because we, as majority of the people, feel the same things every day, day in and day out. We are struggling to pay for our bills. We don't know if our children are gonna make any more money to support us or even themselves. We are starting to feel hopeless, but what gives us hope is knowing that we as individuals, knowing that you want to do something out there and that you are tired of being hopeless, once you start believing that you have the power to create real change, just like how Mary White Ovington did, because she knew what she did mattered. So it doesn't matter what anyone else does, but if you alone think that your actions matter, that's when change will start to happen. If you want to start achieving real change, now is the time to do it.